a pleasant surprise coming out of the Trump administration. I was sort of expecting this, but um, didn't think it would happen this soon. But as the Wall Street Journal reported this morning, surprise, it was a surprise for sure. The U.S. and China, like it says here, has agreed to de-escalate the trade war, maybe call it a ceasefire, so to speak. Um, Both countries, it says, will lower their reciprocal tariffs to 10% for 90 days to allow for continued trade talks. Um, and This point here, which I'm going to talk about later in the video about 20% levy related to fentanyl, is something that I am very pleasantly surprised about the Trump administration doing. Yeah, but this video, I just kind of want to dissect this article, dissect what the recent news has to say, and sort of read in between the lines of where Trump himself is actually at on all of this. But if you recall, I made a video on Liberation Day. Um, I'm only calling it Liberation Day because that's what Trump called it. I don't think it was very liberating. But anyways, this idea of reciprocal tariffs the Trump administration put on, from a bunch of no-name African countries all the way to an island where only penguins inhabit. These ideas of trade deficits is something that the Trump administration took very seriously. And I even remember the president of Israel, Netanyahu, saying, we'll figure out the trade deficits. We'll have a zero trade deficit with the United States, which is, I think, near impossible. But this idea of trade deficits, I will completely go out on a limb and say, sarcastically, obviously, that trade deficits are not the end all be all. Most economists, if not all, except maybe Pete Navarro, more on him later, will tell you that a trade deficit doesn't really mean much in terms of the overall strength and health of an economy, in terms of how rich the people are. It's just one of those measurements. Are we taking in more from a country? And for some reason, Donald Trump had this idea. Maybe it was him himself. Maybe it was his MAGA cabinet of we're not getting enough from Kenya. Kenya or all these African countries with a fraction of the U.S. population, um, they're sending in more products to us than we are buying from them, and quite frankly, that's a no shit idea. So off the bat, these ideas of reciprocal tariffs were fraudulent to begin with. But you saw that immediately after the stock market went berserk and all these things happened, the U.S. signed a trade deal with the U.K. Donald Trump paused a lot of tariffs on China originally, I think, for electronic things and semiconductors and whatnot. And now you have a full-blown um, tariff unwinding, de-escalation, as the Wall Street Journal reports. And I think that tells me a lot. And the one point I want to hammer home this video is that Trump is not an ideologue. You could think of a bunch of ideologues out there like Bernie Sanders or Ron Paul who have this very strict idea about how an economy should be ran, how the tax system should work, such and so forth. But I don't think Donald Trump is one of those people. Whether Trump is inflated more or seeking to benefit his ego or seeking to benefit the country in its entirety is up to you to decide. I can't really fully grasp or fully know. I don't think anybody could fully know what Donald Trump's intentions are. But bottom the line is he is not an ideologue. And I think a great example of this was actually during his first presidency, where at the beginning of COVID, he was very pro, mandates, lockdowns, all that good stuff. But when he saw a great, growing, increasing number of his fan base saying, we're sick and tired of these mandates or these lockdowns or whatever they want to call it, Trump used that to his advantage and switched gears on that. So, whether or not, you think Trump is an egomaniac or just wants to see America prosper is up to you. The point I think that is 100% true is that Donald Trump is not an ideologue. Number two, I think what's really pleasantly surprising about this trade deal I have highlighted is this heavy focus on the tariffs regarding to fentanyl and the problem of fentanyl on our country. There is a difference between a higher price or a recession or anything like that than actual American lives lost. And I really, wished that the Trump administration did not make the immigration, the border crisis about, Trump's classic attack line of, where they're sending murderers, rapists, gang members, mental institutions, insane asylums, those kind of wordage that he used to really alienate his fan base, though not entirely racist or xenophobic, so to speak, on paper. The way he carried himself sure could be used as a means of a dog whistle to appeal to his most rabid and radical fans. But in my opinion, I still think that the border crisis during the Biden administration was terrible. And I think the biggest reason was not the immigrants themselves coming to the country, rather the fentanyl being trafficked. Now, for those of you who don't know, fentanyl obviously is a very deadly drug. It's so easy to slip and things of that nature. But the main point I want to hammer home is that the ingredients, so to speak, the compounds necessary to traffic fentanyl in a drug-like form is coming straight from China, and it's almost like a plot out of like some crazy geopolitical thing because it's just like, wow, you know what I mean? But I feel like a lot of people are not aware of this fact, or a lot of people don't realize how severe it is. And I think a great example of um, how much of a lock China has on our drug epidemic is horse tranquilizer. So for many of you who don't know, alongside fentanyl, horse tranquilizer or trank, as it's like commonly referred to on the streets, has had detrimental effects on many urban populations. I watched a great documentary about horse tranquilizer having a severe effect on Kensington, which is a borough of Philadelphia. And so to keep the story as short as possible, what used to happen was Chinese veterinarians would sell, pharmaceutical companies would sell these ingredients to make trank to, various cartels in South America. They would, do their Heisenberg, Walter White kind of magic to it, and then smuggle it across the border with mules of immigrants who are just trying to come across the border and start a new life here. Um, so that would be sold to the cartel, and the cartel would traffic it and have this expansive network of just trafficking these most vicious and vile drugs to people with effects that cannot be treated, so to speak. They're just rotting away at people's lives. But a new development happened where Chinese pharmaceutical companies are able to make a cheaper alternative to horse tranquilizer or fentanyl in almost like a powder, kind of soluble form, and send it directly into the states without having to traffic it up through the cartels. And so the cartels are being pissed off about this, and now you're seeing a lot of gang warfare activity. Cartels are targeting specific drug dealers who use the drugs straight from China. So what that all goes to show that China really has a stronghold on our drug epidemic. And I think it's kind of embarrassing, and it's one of the faults of the Trump administration. Maybe, it doesn't sound as fun in a political campaign, but the amount of fentanyl related deaths because of a lackluster border, or, a unwatched or unkept or uncontrolled cartel in South America all the way up leading to Mexico is severely dangerous. And what frustrates me most is that China is going to deny this. And I like to applaud Scott Bessent, who says, in this meeting, he was reported to pick up a little more sugar, like a bit of sugar, and said that this amount could kill people across the entirety of Geneva, Switzerland, Geneva, where they had their trade talks and whatnot. And I think this issue should be brought much to attention, that the drug epidemic is being fueled not only by the cartels, but China itself. So I'm excited, more intrigued to see where that plays out. But, all in all, do I think Trump is still pro-tariff? I think yes. I think Trump just really, it's like an ex you can't get over. He just really wants it to work out. He really wants these tariffs to work because he just has this weird fantasy in his head that if he just keeps pushing, 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 the tariff is going to work. But maybe good, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it. He doesn't like it when the economy is suffering. He doesn't like it when his approval rating goes down, or even people within his own party start criticizing him. So he will roll back on these things. Um, but does that mean, he's pro free markets? I'd be hard pressed to believe unless more information comes out. But the one thing I will also bring up is this idea of, instead of tariffs, my suggestion, and I think Trump is picking up on these cues, is instead of tariffing the hell out of China to get quote unquote better trade deals so they don't rip us off, how about move production, move your relationship to another developing, expansive country. And the first country everybody thinks of is India. India is home to the largest democracy on planet Earth. They are very pro America. They are willing to work with America. They are pro capitalism, pro free trade. And I think that's something that America and India see eye to eye on. And I also think that was indicative, and I think Trump sees that a little bit, where he was super, against this idea of India and Pakistan going to war. Trump's the same guy who's going to bomb the Houthis because of these types of things on a whim. And when it comes to India, Pakistan, he just wants nothing to do with it. He wants a ceasefire immediately because of how valuable India's economy is on the world scale. So I think, in my opinion, I guess I'd have to do more research on this, but finding tactics, finding key ways to shift our means of production, our sources of cheap goods that we buy, from Amazon and whatnot, from China over to India. And I think, obviously that's going to take a while, but that's the mode you want to go for, in my opinion. But I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts, hear your opinion. Um, what do you think Donald Trump is going to do in the coming days, and whether or not you think trade deals with China are going to go to a zero tariff policy or anything like that? But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.